Duchess's Dinner Party, a podcast all about hit social deduction game Blood on the Clock Tower and the distinguished opinions of its players. Joining myself, Mia Gwen, in a visit to the Duchess tonight, my first guest has never been what they call the funniest outsider, the Tinker. It's Navean. Please go ahead and reintroduce yourself and where people might know you from.
Hello. Mia doesn't agree with me that Tinker is the funniest outsider, and that's because she's wrong. But we can talk about that some other time, not this episode. You can find me on CTVOTC on Twitch and Discord.
My second guest has never eaten a poached egg. It's Garrett. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and where people might know you from.
Hello, I'm Garrett. People will know me from Twitch chats probably, or various Twitch discords, as I seem to have installed myself as a moderator in about half of the Clock Tower community, it seems. I also started just over a year ago working on the online app as a developer in a very much secondary capacity to Brain, but it was something I was really excited to get involved with.
It's lovely to have you both here. Navian, would like to go ahead and share your opinion first?
Yeah, sure. So my opinion is that you will have a more fun and interesting game of BMR if you just execute living players instead of doing safety double taps, especially in the early game. So we all know that BMR can have some pacing issues, and some of that can come from the storyteller side, don't get me wrong, right? Some of it's bag building, some of it is how long you let the day go for, but some of it is player side, and we can help BMR's pacing issues by just killing people. If you think that it is a Zomboul game, you definitely have time to wait till closer till the end of the game to start double tapping players. And if you think it's a mastermind game, then great. There is at least one evil player alive. I think that double tapping is a boring choice, basically, and it helps stall the game. So one way that a pacing issue happens, and we see this most commonly in Zomboul games, is that the majority of Clock Tower has a pace of at least one kill in the day and at least one kill at night. BMR sometimes doesn't have that. You can get no execution in the day or no death by execution, and you can have no deaths at night. That's like the whole point of the script, is that there's this massive variety in kill amounts. But the problem that you run into is when you don't have your minimum of 1 day, 1 night kill, it drags on the game. And not only does that increase the amount of time, but also just from, even if your timing is like going okay, if you're not getting the kills, then you're essentially not making progress in the game. And that can be a thing that makes people feel like the game is taking longer than maybe it even actually is. And you don't help that by doing double taps early in the game every time there's been no death at night, just in case it's a mastermind day. If you think it's a mastermind day, find the player that you think is evil and kill them. If you lose a game because it maybe is actually a mastermind day and evil has managed to frame a good player as likely evil, then that's fun. Just embrace the fact that sometimes you might lose when you make bold plays, but the bold plays are way more interesting.
Yeah, so I want to touch on the mastermind point. And I think it really speaks to there's a quote in game design that players will optimize the fun out of a game. And I think that mastermind days do that in that double tapping it's the safest option. It's the option of least resistance and energy invested in that I think you're the demon, we've killed you once, let's just kill you again, as opposed to I think you're the demon, we've killed you, now let's put in the energy and effort required to work out who we think your mastermind is. So I do agree with this opinion. I do think it also just makes the mastermind a minion, because I find so often mastermind is just execute the demon day 1, let the assassin stab someone night 2, and then execute a random good player day 2, which is really uninteresting.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
it
I
is.
find that it never gets a win.
Yeah, I think that play pattern for Mastermind is like, this is why people dread drawing the Mastermind token, right? Because they know, like, I'm going to do nothing in this game unless we have an assassin and I can get something off like super early. That's just this, uh, it's a rut that the Mastermind is in, and we pull the Mastermind token and go, oh no, I'm just not going to do anything this game. I have nothing to contribute to my team, barring this singular situation. And I don't think that's, that's not fun for anybody, right? To pull a token and be like, bleh. So if we all play in a way that actually maybe makes this a little bit more of a threat, then we're doing something that will have a positive impact on not just the other people that we're playing with, but at some point in our clock tower lives, ourselves as well.
I think that's fair. I think there's certainly other ways to play Mastermind than just sit there and do nothing. Like if your win condition depends on there being a night where the demon doesn't get to kill, then it gives you more opportunity to lean into a bluff that prevents death. You know, your innkeeper or even sailor, I guess. But yeah, certainly, I agree that it's more interesting to keep trying to kill new players, new
Yeah,
people.
and like I do think it's important to point out that at some point in the game, there will be a point where you might need to double tap, right? Like Zambul simply requires it in the game. So my opinion is not that you should never double tap in BMR because you literally can't win a Zambul or worse, a Zambul Mastermind game without that. But you don't need to do that until quite late in the game. And even if you're late in the game, if you think it's a Mastermind day as opposed to it's a Zambul that you're double tapping for, consider not double tapping. Consider making it a more interesting game for everybody. Push for a living death.
So how late can you leave starting to look for Zombie candidates? Like you know, um, if you're not killing the same, if you're not double tapping day two, that's one thing. But you know, at the end of the day, at the end of the game, you run out of candidates that you can, like you run out of number of executions that you can possibly double tap with because every failed execution bull
Yeah,
kill.
that's true. So basically, what you need to do in BMR is a little bit of simple maths, right? You just need to count the number of living players, count the number of players who claim to have an ability that could cause a death, like a gossip, for example. If they are continuing to gossip, you need to factor that in. And then you need to factor in the slim possibility that there is an assassin who simply hasn't used their ability who is still alive, and what that might mean for, an additional death in the night. And that can pretty much tell you like when you need to start double tapping. But for most games, and especially like the larger the game is, the longer that'll take you to hit that point, right? There's a lot of candidates that you can rule out of being a Zambul just by the fact of like when deaths happened, how many deaths happened. Zambul games are often solvable as Zambul games somewhere maybe around the mid game when all of the other abilities, like assassins or gossips, are either like dead or have used their ability, or in the gossips case, maybe have stopped using their ability. So there isn't like a number that I can give you for that question because it depends on the specific game state of this particular BMR. But it's usually quite late in the game. You don't have to worry about it in the first minimum half of the game. Like you're fine to just not double tap at all for sure.
I want to ask about Tea Lady. Um, does Tea Lady not encourage double tapping? And like, I think you at least get a lot more value there in confirming 3 players as good by double tapping with a Tea Lady.
Uh, so I have a story about that actually. One of my earlier games of BMR, we spent all of this time as the good team, like double tapping people to confirm them from Tea Lady stuff, that we ran out of time to kill the evil team. We figured out who the evil players were, but we didn't know which was a demon and which was minions, and there wasn't like a minstrel that could help us win more with that information. So we just ran out of time, and the good team got slaughtered before we could kill all of the evil team and specifically the demon. So it does encourage that to some degree. And in a larger game in particular, you can probably sustain doing that once. But it can be a little bit of a trap when you spend too much time on executions for confirmation's sake, as opposed to executions for killing evil's sake. Because one of those things will help you find evil, sure, but it doesn't help you kill evil, and killing evil is your actual win condition.
There's a certain amount of similarity between testing someone for T-Lady or, I guess, T-Lady or pacifist purposes and testing them for devil's advocate, though. Like, in some cases, and I appreciate, like, executing the same alive person during the day is not really the same as double tapping, but sometimes you are doing it to kill an evil
Yeah,
player.
and like for me, I think that's what determines if somebody survives an execution, that should be what determines whether you try to kill that person again is do I think this player is good or evil? If I think it's good and that they were saved because they're a tea lady or a pacifist or a fool or a sailor, then I don't really need to prove that in the game mechanically. I can just move on with the belief that this person is good, right? I can either use social reads or other information in the game that might exist to tell me that kind of thing. That doesn't mean like never try to double tap and solve whether a player is good or not. That's fine. You can do that occasionally. But if you think the player is evil and was DA protected, yeah, absolutely kill that player again. That you want to get evils out. But you know, lean on things like your social reads more so than this sort of rote view of this is how we confirm players because it's a bit of a BMR trap.
Is there something about this that depends on whether you're good or evil? Like, in a lot of cases, whenever there's a meta or something that people do that has a benefit to their team, you need a kind of counterplay as evil? Or is this just something that makes the game for interesting for everyone, and actually it's no benefit to anyone to double tap because the only outcome is a slower, more drawn out game?
I think it's a benefit to everyone for mainly that reason. That's the biggest reason that I hold this opinion. I do think that in terms of game win or loss, maybe it's a slight more benefit to evil because of the chances where you might end up losing on a mastermind day because you've killed the wrong person on that day. But like it's fine. It's fine to lose the game sometimes because you were wrong and evil managed to frame somebody really well. It's not only fine, it's fun. It's fun to find out at the end of a game that somebody completely bamboozled you. Good job on them. They, you know, tricked you into thinking that, you know, either they were good or somebody else was evil. That is a delightful thing in this game.
I don't disagree with this point. I liked the bit as well where you said about like old plays just make Clock Tower more interesting. I know I'm pretty sure you're with gambling on the like more minions should fake being Snake Charmed train.
Oh, hell yeah, Snake Quest. Let's go.
Because like yeah, things very much can get entrenched in metas. This is a slight tangent, but like minions don't bluff being snake charmed, and so people tend to trust like a snake charm claim face up. But just like doing things that are outside of the meta make it more interesting. I do agree.
Yeah, I think the same. I think it's, you know, if what you're looking for in Clock Tower is like fast-paced games where things keep moving and people are getting extra information about what's happened, then double tapping gives you very little information, right? It rules out in general like one world and still leaves you with all the others, and then you just wake up and the game continues as it would have done before.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this the safety mindset of, oh no, we might lose to a mastermind. Let's just kill the person that we've already killed just in case. And it's like I don't enjoy doing things in this game just in case, you know? I want to do something because it feels meaningful to the game, and that doesn't feel meaningful. That feels like I haven't put any thought or feelings into playing the game, engaging with it. I mean, you know, yeah, mastermind ability does somewhat incentivize that, but it doesn't have to. We can just say that you know, there's an evil player alive. We should find who they are and kill them because that's fun.
What do you think about other just in case metas? Like, oh, we've just tied on a Vortox script. Like, do we need to pull out an execution just in case?
I think that if you have like enough people in the game saying that like this is definitely not Vortox, that's probably not an entire evil team lying to you, and therefore you're fine to not execute a dead body. If you can't tell whether it's Vortox or not, then it's a good idea to go ahead and do that. But also, like, I would still, in a Vortox game, in a potential Vortox game, I would still argue that it is almost always better to kill a living player than it is to kill a dead body. And I would use a dead body as essentially like a last resort of there's no way we're ever getting somebody living on the block with the amount of votes that we need based on like the amount that it required to tie, right? But yeah, that's a good point. There are things that sometimes we do for essentially safety's sake in the game in order to keep it going. And I think that's a distinction between these two things, right? The safety Vortox meta is like this game is definitely you know not going to end because we killed a demon. It's going to end because we like screwed up our voting and whatever, as opposed to like a mastermind. If you think it's mastermind day, then you are essentially espousing the belief that this game will end today no matter what we do. So I think that those they're similar, but they're also different in what they are attempting to accomplish.
I think there's another element of safety as well in the avoidance of double tapping, in the BMR can very often come down to like 50/50s, where you can't quite be sure of something. And you can very often have a 50/50 of, for example, either this is a mastermind day and we just executed the demon, or this is an evil team here, and we could just lose to that evil team. And I think that executing a living player is potentially, in the non-mastermind world, it gives you another safety net, if that makes sense. Sure, you're taking the like risk that it is the mastermind day, but if it's not the mastermind day, then
Yeah, there's definitely a point in BMR where you can just lose because you simply haven't killed enough evil players and they're now going to overtake you. And if you execute into those 50/50 worlds where, well, this is either the evil team or that's the evil team, if you execute into those earlier on, then you don't run the risk of, just getting slaughtered.
You do maybe run the risk that actually your mastermind day was a charge, and depending on the maths of the situation, your execution might take it down to a number where a post slaughter would end the game. But this is a niche scenario. It's certainly not. It certainly doesn't undo all the other points you made.
Right. And like when you're at the point in the game where your charge is going to result in the good team losing, you probably haven't managed to kill many evil players because maybe you were too busy double tapping dead bodies instead of killing living players. Maybe. But you probably haven't been pretty efficient at killing evil players, and you're probably more than halfway through the game at that point anyway. There are some situations where that's not true because it's BMR, and we all know that like BMR can have approximately 10 deaths in one night if you really want to max some stuff out. So it is technically possible to shrimply lose a BMR by slaughter very early in the game. But those scenarios are very, very niche. And by the time you hit the point where that's a real threat, you're already doing the maths to figure out, is this the point where we double tap or not?
I would, yeah, and I'd argue on top of that a 10 death BMR slaughter night is interesting in itself. So you don't need to worry about trying to prevent that.
I would love to be in a game where there's 10 deaths in the night. And to be fair, some of those are storyteller controlled. Like I think it requires a tinker to die by the storyteller's hand. But you know what? The tinker can be the final death. If good has already lost, they're already down to like 2 players alive, then fine, I'll kill a tinker just to leave it to 1 player alive.
If you're getting 9 deaths, then what storyteller isn't going to take the opportunity to say, "Well, I had 10 deaths"?
You see, Tinker, funniest outsider.
Yeah. My opinion is people should try and play online Clock Tower the same way as they play or would play in-person Clock Tower. And I'm going to say that like I don't necessarily believe this is a completely definitive, always true statement. I think it's very important that people play Clock Tower how they want to play Clock Tower. Like it's known for having so many different metas and so many different ways to play, and all of those can be rewarding. But I think Clock Tower was designed primarily as an in-person retail social game, right? And the balance that exists, you know, In Trouble Brewing and the other base scripts are based around not necessarily the only way to play Clock Tower, but you know, a certain approach, right? It's something that is called in circles I'm in like the Australian way of playing, right? Where people are in person, they're in a circle, they very rarely leave the circle. In most cases, they never leave the same room, even if they do leave the circle. They have chats which are ostensibly private, but in theory, people could listen in. There is a certain limit to the amount that the average person is able to maintain, be that through remembering what people have claimed, be that writing down your savant statements. And I think a lot of people see the way the online game has developed, right? And the online game has developed so much, right? I think I wasn't around in the community when it started, but during the lockdown games, I think the first online games were played by a storyteller screen sharing their MS Paint window where they had drawn a grimoire and were marking things off, which I think is a fascinating way to bring a social deduction game into a space where it can't otherwise exist. It's obviously developed through a lot of brains work, through the was originally called the Town Square app, became Clock Tower Live, and was developed into the official app. And it's fantastic that online Clock Tower exists in the form that it does at the moment. But with that, people have brought a different kind of mentality to the game, right? And these are quite subtle changes. They're not huge. Some of them are by necessity. The app, for example, you don't have proximity chat in the same way as you have in person, right? It's impossible to have a completely private chat in theory in person because you're just standing in a room. You can overhear people without them necessarily knowing they're overheard, but everyone has the awareness that they might be overheard in person. And then there are just some things online that work completely differently to in-person games, right? Wraith is the poster child example, and anyone who has not had the ability to play a Wraith game in person, that's a shame, to be honest, right? I think it's just impossible to replicate the feel of Wraith online, and I don't it is something that a physical in-person game just can't replicate online. But I think that all of these ways that people have either by technical limitation or by their own change in meta, it kind of, I think without exception, every one of these changes slightly dilutes the social element of this social deduction game. And I think that by bringing back some of the ways that people play in person into online Clock Tower, firstly, you can transition into online Clock Tower, into in-person Clock Tower more easily. And secondly, I just think it just brings back more of the social side of things. Now, there's some caveats around this, right? There are certainly some things that just because of the technical limitations can't be brought into online Clock Tower. And then I guess the other big thing is to think that not everyone has access to in-person Clock Tower, and this is another great thing that online Clock Tower brings. But, some people don't live in places where there are large enough groups to play Clock Tower, or for various accessibility reasons they're unable to make it to in-person Clock Tower. That's why this is not an authoritative, definitive opinion. But certainly I think there are principles of online that people can dial down to bring their experience closer to being in person. Hesitate to say pure Clock Tower, but the original form of Clock Tower.
One of the big limitations that you talked about was, in person, you have this possibility of being overheard. Somebody could just walk up behind you and, whatever. There's a lot of groups that have a sort of taboo against purposefully attempting to eavesdrop. and that's fine. I don't necessarily mind that in-person clock tower, but you know, if you're all in close quarters, you have to be a little bit more careful about how loud you're talking and exactly what you're saying because somebody might overhear you. And that's a thing that is very difficult to replicate online. But I think one of the things that we can do to help with that a little bit is just be more proactive about asking to join other people's chats. You know, you see two people hanging out by the side, and you're like, well, you know, I've just finished my conversation with whoever I was talking to, and there's nobody new to chat to. Go try to barge in on to somebody else's conversation. And, you know, on the flip side of that, when you are in a conversation and somebody pings in, just add them. Like, let the other person know, hey, I'm going to add this person in, but don't like ask for permission. Just let the player in. Uh, this will help facilitate more of that social lubrication and more of that flow of information and more dynamic like chatting that can happen in person. You know, we'll never be able to perfectly replicate it, but I think that's one way that we can increase the like wider conversation that can happen when you're more inside the circle in an in-person game.
Yeah, and like I think that's a very good point. I think there's certainly uh, you see it a lot more on stream games, certainly on the bigger games like TPI's official channel, Patter's, Arif. Um, there's much more an established convention of just allowing people in, and you know larger group conversations certainly do help that. Um, but to counter your point, like I actually think you're a lot safer from eavesdropping than you think you are in person. I think you know when you have a conversation like one on one, it's very easy to think you're being heard, but actually everyone else is generally too busy having their own conversations and thinking about their own information. Like I've had a number of games. There's one notable game at the last Good LeechCon where I was the poisoner in a Trouble Brewing game, and Robe was my demon. He got up, walked into the middle of the circle, and told me surprisingly loudly what the three bluffs were and what he was planning to claim. And no one else heard a thing. Everyone else was too busy in their own little worlds. And like that's the thing that I guess it's when your only experience to Clock Tower has been, you know, the only ways of talking are in town with everyone present and in private conversations that are isolated. You think that those are the only two ways to talk to people in like you can get the feeling that that's the only option, and it's not. You can talk pretty loudly and still not be heard.
No, I agree with you, but to counterpoint your counterpoint, the threat of the potential like somebody's overhearing me is is all that's really needed in order to change people's behavior. I certainly agree with you that it's actually not as big of a threat as a lot of people think. And but the fact that people think that it is a threat at all will still change some of their behavior at least. So it is still a bit different, but you're right that it's perhaps not quite as different as people assume that it is.
I will say on this point, I have been the recipient of like I played a game about a month ago now where I did hear a minion come up to the demon and go, "Hey, what are the bluffs?" And in that game, I kind of felt like I had to then give mechanical information as well as like I heard this player asking for bluff in order to make that feel more enjoyable as an experience. In the end, I was the artist, and I said my artist question was I asked was one of these two players the demon, and got a yes, which I did do. And so Town executed them both. But I think that it is generally like it is a threat that can occur, and it's something that people need to be aware of. But also, it just makes for an unfun game if it does happen. I think.
Yeah, and I guess like you know there's a certain extent that like I think my point is more a point for discussion rather than like something that I strongly believe everyone should just immediately do. But I certainly think that there is an argument that teams should not like. I think the games you're talking about there is a lot more coordination and communication than a lot of the early TPI videos show players having. Right, there are filmed in-person games of some of the early base 3 scripts where an evil team doesn't necessarily talk to their entire evil team, right? We all know that bluffs are not necessarily designed to be, here are three characters for the three evil here are three characters for the evil team to share between them. They're just characters that the demon knows not in play, and the minions can, are encouraged to run interference or get into double claims and things like that. So you're right that people being overheard is a risk, particularly for the evil team, and something that in-person play might need you to have other ways to work around. I think it always feels bad when you get some external meta information, like hearing someone moving in the night or something like that can change the game. I think those are not insurmountable problems.
One question I want to posit is, why do they need to be the same? Why should we not embrace the strengths of that, like, each different format brings? I think you spoke about, like, it means that people can transition easier from playing online to playing in person. 'Cause I do think it is a big jump. But there are things that, like, naturally happen. Like, for example, in person versus online. One that I think of quite easily is innately whisper tracking, but also, like, when you're playing in person, it's very common, in my experience, to just turn to your neighbor on the start of day one and just start having a conversation with your neighbor. Whereas, for example, online, you can just ping anyone. There isn't actually a physical distance apart from how far you have to move your mouse. But also, like, I then don't make a mental note that my neighbor got up and went to go and speak to this person immediately. Instead, it's just, I pinged this person in the circle because I wanted to chat with them first. Whereas in person, it's, oh, my neighbor got up, immediately went to go and speak to this person. There's sort of information there for me to learn from.
Yeah, I think, certainly the information you get from playing online is different to the information that you get in person, right? Another very common difference is that a spy can take a screenshot of the grimoire that pops up on screen, right? And they get perfect information about it that they don't have to remember. My very first in-person game, which I think was my 12th ever game, I went to a meetup group. It was a 15-player game, and I pulled the spy token, right? And I was shown. We weren't even playing in a circle around a space because of the setup of the venue. We were playing around a table, and so the storyteller had to reach over me awkwardly, hold the grim in front of my face for me to see. I'm absolutely certain that the person next to me knew exactly what was happening, and I had no facility to take in all of that information. And some people would say that's terrible, but I would say that's the experience, right? I think, and I think people smarter than me have talked about how the spy is balanced around not necessarily needing to remember all the information, and knowing the information is very like knowing the information is the minor part of the spy's ability as opposed to registering. But yeah, that, and whisper tracking, I don't think that online play is worse. Absolutely not. I just think the more online play is different to in-person play, the more it just shifts the balance of the game. And I guess it shifts the balance of the game in a way that isn't necessarily intended by the design team. And that absolutely is not a bad thing, but it's a thing that is measured differently. And it just kind of subtly shifts the game in a way that means that when people do play in person, all of a sudden they're looking for like separate rooms to have their conversations in, and other such matters, which I think, I really enjoy the core Clock Tower in-person experience, and I want people to be able to have more of that.
I think that one of the things that impacts the community behavior and beliefs around some of this stuff is some of the like professional entertainment clock tower content out there. There are a lot of people who have gotten into clock tower specifically through these kinds of videos, and when they do in-person clock tower, they have these, elaborate setups and all these different rooms and, like spaces for people to talk to the camera individually about their thoughts on the game. And those games are entertaining to watch. I'm not saying that it is like a bad thing that these exist. I watch some of them myself, right? They're a lot of fun, but they are productions and they are designed around providing a high level of entertainment to an audience. They are not really representative of how Clock Tower is designed to be played and how the vast majority of in-person games play out in actuality. So sometimes people will take essentially like lessons away from these entertainment pieces that are not actually beneficial towards playing the game themselves.
Absolutely. And, I think the number of people who get into Clock Tower through that is huge. And, it can't be it can't be underestimated. But it does, yeah, as you say, it means people don't have an impression of what a small intimate Clock Tower game with your friends in a in a room around a coffee table is really like. And I think it's not that maybe it's not that people should change their play to match how it would be in person, but it's that they should be aware of what this other experience is like and embrace the benefits that you can get from playing more socially, playing without such a strict adherence to perfect memorization of information or perfect coordination, because like those are some of the most fun games that I've had, at least personally.
Oh, that brings me to a point that I wanted to make, which is about note taking. So I want to be really clear that I'm not saying that nobody should ever take notes when they are playing online Clock Tower, because there are people who take notes in-person Clock Tower, especially for accessibility reasons. I have very loudly over the years been one of those people. I have memory problems, and Clock Tower is essentially an inaccessible game to me if I don't take any notes ever. So I want to be clear that I'm not saying that notes are inherently bad or that they never happen in-person games. But most people do not take any kind of notes in-person Clock Tower games. And if like when we're playing online, we all have these grimoires that are in front of us, and that makes it really easy and really fast to take notes just about people's claims, about their information, and maybe experiment some with doing that a bit less. You don't have to necessarily go from, oh, I'm a person who like tracks everything that I get told when I play online, to all of a sudden you're tracking nothing. If you want to essentially like wean off this concept of taking notes, then maybe bring it down to just putting people's claims in the grim and nothing else, right? And then eventually you can work your way towards no notes at all. But that's another way to make your online play better mimic what it's like playing in person if you are a person who already does not take notes when you play in person. Like if you're a person who takes notes in person for accessibility reasons, then yeah, obviously you're going to continue that online as well. That will match your experience. But that can be a disparity for quite a lot of players in their online versus in-person play.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I'm certainly not saying that people shouldn't like take notes and have information available to them if that's the way they want to play. But the thing is that playing in person, there is a level of effort to that, right? You need to bring a notebook, you need to decide what you're going to write down, you need to take time writing down your savant statements or whatever. Like it's like this is the reason, for example, that the online app doesn't have a player visible voting history, right? If you it needs to be plausible that that a town crier could make a mistake tracking who nominated, or a flower girl could forget to track that someone voted, and that works both from the townsfolk's point of view as well as the point of view of an evil player who is trying to bluff one of those. So yeah, absolutely, notes can be a valuable thing. It's just the difference in it's the effort required to take notes as opposed to it just being given to you for free just from virtue of the fact that you're playing online.
100%. I think that we should not even have any option at all to have votes or nominations visible to players. That should be exclusively for a storyteller's benefit in case, like, so in person, we have the little night cards that are did you vote today and did you nominate today, in case you forgot to track that during the day. You can also, on occasion, just wake a minion or a demon and use that card and like make them think that there could be this role in play when there's actually not. But that's like a tangent. But online, we don't have to use those cards because we have the ability for those to be tracked. But that tracking should not ever be an option to be available to players at all. There are people who are absolutely going to disagree with this, and they would like throw a conniption fit if they weren't available as an option to turn on, or like with clocktower.live, it's just on by default, and I can't stand it. It's just that's one of the things that came out of online Clock Tower that is vastly different to how it is in person. Is you should not have access to that information. If you want access to that information, then you can track it, and that's an okay thing to track. People track that in person. They have notes for tracking that in person. But you should be putting in that effort to be tracking that yourself. I agree that should not be handed to people.
And again, like the whole underlying thing behind my point here is not that online Clock Tower is better than in-person Clock Tower because of these features or these differences. It's not even that in-person Clock Tower is better than online Clock Tower, like because of whatever reason. It's just that people who primarily or only play online are missing out, are not necessarily getting the experience of this this whole completely different mode of playing, and I think it's a lot of fun.
One point I just want to discuss very quickly, and then probably move on, is there's sort of an underlying theme here of like design intent, and like, oh, the spy wasn't designed to have perfect memory of the grim, things like that. But I think there is an element of, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter the design intent. What matters is how people play that. And I think that focusing too much on what the design intent was or is, perhaps diminishes from what it's actually become.
Yeah, I think like that's definitely a reasonable viewpoint. And like I say, I guess it's why I think I'm not saying that either online or offline play is better than the other. It's just, the way, I think certainly the way that Jams and Steven think about the game and how they're trying to like add new characters to it and how everything fits together has not been done with the way the online metas have evolved in mind, right? And I guess what I'm saying is really just that, like I said before, it changes the game. It makes the metas subtly different and slightly different. And, maybe those changes aren't big enough to swing TB's win rate to like 60-40 from 50-50. But I think, the design intent is important because Clock Tower is an evolving game, and the new stuff fits in with what's there already. But certainly, a game that has evolved has still evolved and is still like a fun game. And people play Clock Tower in so many different ways that wasn't envisaged, right? I don't think if you had asked Steven to list all the ways Clock Tower could possibly be played, he probably wouldn't have come up with Quantum Clock Tower. But it's a thing that exists, and it's a fascinating way to take this game and push it in a different direction. And some Clock Tower players are some of the most creative people I know, and they can do so many things with it. So I'm certainly not trying to shit on anyone's opinion, but I just want people who have come into this wonderful hobby through online only methods to have a way to reason to think about dialing it back and experiencing the original core game.
Very quickly, there is exactly one character that has been designed specifically for use in the official app only. Do either of you want to try and take a guess
the
as to
gardener.
what character that is?
It's the gardener.
And
Yeah,
I'll say why, because I think some people don't realize why. And the reason is because if you are playing in-person Clock Tower and the storyteller is designing a specific game with a specific setup or people pulling specific tokens or whatever, you can see that. You know when that bag is not gone around and it's not a random draw. Everybody is well aware that that is happening, and they get to make that informed decision about whether they want to engage with a game where the storyteller is like purposefully putting things in spots. Online, that was not visible until we had the gardener. I think the gardener was a great addition.
And I'm going to give credit to Rhea for this because this comes from a discussion I was having with Rhea. But I want to start by asking both of you a simple question, which is that if you had to if you had to define yourself as either a social player or a mechanical player, which one would you define yourself as? There is no I'm mostly social but some mechanical. I need a absolute answer.
I would love to be a mechanical player. I'm very logical, and I love kind of logic puzzles, but I have not yet developed enough of a clock tower brain to solve games mechanically. So, as much as I didn't expect myself to ever call myself this when I started playing Clock Tower, I am more of a social player.
So the question I want to posit to both of you is, are those terms necessary or are they actually needed? I think that I would perhaps describe myself as a more mechanical player, but I think the more you play Clock Tower, the more you realize that actually you can never truly be one of them. Yeah, I think you said there that like you currently define yourself as a social player, but you think quite logically and you'd like to be able to solve games by mechanic. But like I think what you're saying there is, as a social player, I use mechanics sometimes. And Navean, I think you spoke about it in the BMR example opinion that you gave, where you said, "Oh, we don't need to double tap this person." That's double tapping is a very mechanical thing, but you then said, "I can just get a social read on them." And so I think the terms have some broad value, but generally speaking, you don't like to be a good clock tower player, for lack of a better word. Like, you need to be able to do both. You need to be both a mechanical and a social player.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely do. I think, one of the early blog posts that was written by Stephen about the creation of Trouble Brewing was that it's designed that you can learn about 90% of the information in a game mechanically, right? And, we all love Trouble Brewing because of those, like, you're never quite sure, right? There's enough other worlds that it's very rare to get into a completely mechanically confirmed game. So yeah, I think you certainly can't only be a mechanical or only a social player, but they certainly are different ways to get information, and you have to be some kind of balance of those two things.
Essentially, you presented the question like you can't pick any of that gray space in between. You can't add nuance to this. You're one or the other. That necessarily flattens the experience that most people have with this game, and it's very reductionist, right? I am a player who leans more into mechanics because I am better at those than social reads in this game. And therefore, if I'm forced to pick a side, then sure, I'm going to say that I fall on the side of mechanics. But I think that it would be disingenuous to say that I am exclusively a mechanical player and that I never lean on social reads. I don't think anybody ever wholly leans one way or the other, and like that's fine. I also think that it's okay if you lean pretty hard one way or the other because this is a team game, right? I know that my social reads are not always the most reliable. I have a lot of like blind spots that I am aware of at the very least. But also, it's just not my strength. My strength is knowing the rules, the roles, and the interactions, and that lends itself towards the mechanical aspects of the game. But what I can do is I can find somebody in the game who I know is good at social reads, and I can lean on them for their social reads and synthesize their strengths and my strengths to create this team game and this team effort to end up in a good situation in the game. I don't have to do it all myself, just like nobody else in the game has to do it all themselves.
I think one of the things that has stopped me becoming like from using my logical brain to solve clock tower games, for example, is the fact that so many of the like metas and plays that have gone into like experienced players like brain repertoire of all the things that have ever happened to them in clock tower all involve social plays. like I spent a while trying to watch games and think watch games back like player perspectives and think, well, from what you've been told, like how do you know that this this isn't a mastermind game, or that this player must be the Scarlet Woman of all things. And really, I think a lot of the things that mechanical solvers have kind of built into their brain muscle memory is you learn from repetition, and you definitely need a good knowledge of how mechanics interact, but they've also internalized the way that games have played out in the past, which have been through a combination of mechanical and social elements. So I think anyone who has kind of got a mechanical solve on things has probably discarded a lot of possible worlds for social reasons, like just inherently, just from the fact that that's where their game experience has come from.
I really like that point. I think it's at the core of this. I understand that I push you into making a choice, but I thought it would be interesting to do so because it makes you think that it's very difficult to just be one. You do need shades of both, I think. Which I think has value.
Yeah, absolutely. This game is a social deduction game, right? And both of those words are in the category for a reason. If you completely ignore one side of it, you are not getting the full experience of either social or deduction, you know? It's both, and that's what makes it beautiful.
Yeah, I just it's made me think about it, and it I am someone who would define myself as a mechanical player if presented with the choice between having to choose one or the other. But I mean, firstly, Ed called me out and said that I am a social player, or said that more of a social player than he thought recently. But I very much, I think innately, I think social is a lot more for me, kind of an innate thing that I can't really explain, and so I tend to not look at it as much, if that makes sense. Whereas a mechanical thing, I can tell you that the fortune teller has a yes on you, and that is as close to objectifiable truth within Clock Tower as you can get. I can't tell you why I necessarily socially trust that fortune teller. Sometimes it's a case of just I don't think they've done anything evil. It's a lack of evilness, but I can't be well, you didn't do this thing that was evil and you didn't do that thing that's evil. And so I think it's something that I innately have looked, but I think it's something that is more just processed alongside it that I think you were talking about.
Yeah, like for example, you're also ruling out, like if fortune teller gets a yes, you also got to dismiss the fact that were they drunk or poisoned, and social plays will lead you into thinking that, along with whether other things tell you it's a poisoner game. I think what the main difference between the people I look at and see them as really experienced, great solvers of the game, and people who are still trying to figure all that stuff out, is just the experienced players have got used to dismissing wrong worlds very quickly, right? For right or wrong, but and I don't think you can necessarily describe what the reasons for dismissing those worlds are, and that's, I think, the reason why you can't teach someone how to solve a game, right? You just have to get your 10,000 hours in, if that's the kind of metric we're using for expertise.
I think that social reads are very much like a vibes based thing, and it can be really difficult for the majority of people to describe or to pinpoint where the vibes are coming from, right? We know that we have these vibes, but we can't exactly say what's giving it. There are a few people who are really skilled at that and can articulate why they're getting specific vibes. Previous guest Molobach is one of them. Ryan, who has shown up on streams occasionally, the one who asks, "Are you evil? Is this are you actually this role?" He is really good. If you can get him to articulate why he thinks people are good or evil on his social reads, he can tell you why really well. But most people are not that in tune with where the vibes are coming from to be able to do that. So yeah, it's much easier to regurgitate mechanical information that has been given in the game than it is to say, I think this person is good specifically because of that, or that person is evil specifically because of this.
I think a really great sort of cross point where like these two things meet is sort of the phrase when you're in Final Five or Final Four and someone asks, "Do we think we've killed an evil player?" Because so often I think that that comes down to socials more than it does mechanic, but you also just like I don't think you can ever truly dismiss mechanics within Clock Tower. I'd love to see a script and see what that looks like. But I think that like you need to be able to hone that because like you won't necessarily have information on if you have three evils alive or not. And that's something that like you need to be able to resolve in games.
I think if you're looking for that game, then you should look for the TPI Pope release game, where Ben made every good character the drunk. But yeah, I think and being able to pick up on socials is again a product of mechanical reads, right? Because you have to be able to tell whether someone is like really believes in the mechanical world they're selling, right? And you need to understand the mechanical implications of the world they're selling to kind of base that off of, I think.
Right. How the information is presented, the conviction with which it's being presented. Those are all things that you can read into, like when somebody's telling you their information. You can sometimes get vibes of like, this person doesn't even believe their own information. And then you examine why to determine, do they think they're drunk or poisoned, or are they just evil and they know that this is wrong?